today. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are excited to have one of our close friends and sponsors of the Dog Gurus, Terwisscha. I can't even pronounce it. Eric, you're going to have to say it for me. Terwisscha Construction. And Eric will be doing a presentation today, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it off since we started a few minutes late, and let everybody enjoy your presentation.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for being a couple minutes late. That was really on me. I'm glad all you guys are here. Exciting stuff. I'm going to set this up with, I'm not a professional speaker, but I do have a lot of good information to cover for you guys today. There is so much to talk about when it comes to design and construction and a project that there's no way to pack it all in an hour. But I want to try and hit on the things that you guys really need to be thinking about when you're going through it. So you're probably going to have a lot of questions. Most people do. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to handle them all in the call, but we'll find out. I'll try and cover what I can on here. So let me get started with who we are. Terwisscha Construction. We're based out of Willmar, Minnesota. That's not really a destination place for most people, and it's cold there 12 out of 12 months. So generally not the most targeted destination, although Alaska might be slightly colder part of the year. So, but everyone's from somewhere. That happens to be where we're from. We started in 1963. We're a design build firm, and we focus on animal care. That is our number one business. We also do local construction and design as well, but that's kind of our national thing that we focus on. Just recently, we added our flooring and installation side of the business so that we can deliver for our clients on that as well. 1963. So we, like I said, been around a long time. We have architecture in-house, as well as we have traveling superintendents that do our construction projects. But I'm not going to focus. I want to give you guys a little background on who we are, but that's actually not the focus of today's discussion. It's really to prepare you for what you're looking to do on your projects. Here's what we're going to cover. Talk about programming and the team members that you're going to need. I am probably going to use some terminology that is specific to my industry. That's not meant to lose you, but if I use a word that you're not really sure how I'm using or how it fits in the mix, type it into the, do you want to use the chat, Carrie? Is that what you want to use for questions? Yeah, so, yeah. Okay, so type it into the chat and send it over if I lose you on something, but I'm going to try and work fast because there's a lot to go over. But programming in your team, programming is going to be the overall scope of what you're looking to do for your project. Team members are going to be the additional people that you're going to need in the mix. Keep in mind that everything I'm going to tell you today, I can give you examples on what I'm saying is exactly how it's going to go, and I can give you just as many examples of how that's not how it's going to go. So don't take what I'm telling you as this is the only way that it happens. I'm going to try and give you the knowledge and the education to be able to ask the right questions, to be able to get where you need to go based on your conditions, your project. All right. So we're going to bring on certain members of your team. We're going to take a look at the different projects, the different project styles, which are going to be, what type of property you're looking at, whether it's a ground up construction, whether it's a lease space, or possibly a renovation or renovation expansion. We'll talk about architecture and engineering in the animal care world. It's a little bit of a unique thing, as you probably have gathered. You've probably seen that some people can do projects without architects and engineers, and other projects you can't have enough of them. So, and you're going to fall somewhere probably in between. Then we're going to talk about construction budgeting and some good practices. And then lastly, planning for success before you open the door. So that's kind of the overview of it. Let's get into the details. This is just a great image. I thought that one should fit on there. So master planning, that's what I'm calling it. But what it really is the programming portion. Before you start, and what we do with most of our clients is we give them a questionnaire to fill out. That's not the only way to do it. If you've made your list of what you want in your space, that is whoever is going to be doing the design is going to need that level of information. And the details on it are things like quantities, obviously, sizes of spaces, and then the offering that you want to be able to do. When we go through the details, we're asking questions upon questions upon questions to try and get the full sense of what you're looking for. Sometimes the answer is Clients just want our professional advice. Here's the direction I would go if it was my business. But every detail somebody has to think through and come up with an answer for. So it's great if you've thought through it and have a good game plan on what you want to be able to accomplish with it. I mentioned on here, what areas are you flexible with? The reason I say that is you've probably all experienced or seen in recent times that costs seem to have gone up. And in my world, we saw the most volatile construction industry over the last couple of years that I've seen in my entire lifetime in this. Now I'm not 100 years old, but I've been doing this for about 20 years. And this was the most difficult window of time to keep up with the price changes and the fact that there was constant things happening. So what you need to have is, here's my core, and then what area, you add those ancillary things, and what am I flexible with? Next, we're going to talk about the team members that you're going to have. So I don't want to be dismissive of your role in this process. It all starts with you. It's your idea. Ultimately, you're going to have to pay back whatever money you're borrowing to be able to do this if you're borrowing money or investing your own money. You're a big part of this. So I don't want you to think that you can just give this to everybody else and have it all work out. You're going to need to play a role in it. Depending on who you have on your team is going to change how much involvement you're going to have. The more knowledgeable people you have in respect to your industry, the less detail that you're going to need to get into. The less experience you have, the more effort you're going to have to put into. So you're going to need likely an architect or a designer of some sort. You're probably going to need a contractor unless you're going to do it yourself, which is an option. You're just going to trade your ability to produce revenue on your side to investing and trying to save money on the construction side. You're also going to need a lender, likely. Now, if you've got the cash sitting there, that's awesome. That's going to be the least expensive way to go. If your project's significantly larger in size, then you're probably going to need a lender involved. You're probably going to need a realtor. To what capacity depends on which project you're looking at. If you're looking at a lease space, realtors will find a lot of lease spaces for you. Same with land. Some of you may already have a bead on something, and a realtor is not going to be an integral part of your process, but that is a pretty consistent team member that would need to be involved early on. Bring up consultants. There's a lot of consultants out there. Depending on your business acumen or your experience in this may change, what level of involvement a consultant's going to do for you. Your accountant is probably going to be involved. Unless you're doing all of your own accounting stuff, you're going to want to take a look at cash flow. That is a big part of what makes your business successful, and making sure that you're not going without because you overbuilt or the project was too big. And then legal. Normally there isn't the legal need isn't so much for a problem as much as it is setting up maybe a secondary corporation. If you don't have that already, that is something that could come into play. That's not my call to say what type of business model is you're going to run, but that normally is a piece of the puzzle. I include that in the group because everyone's got a little bit of a role to play in there. All right, rolling into the different types of projects. We've got the new build. So here's what I'm going to hit on, and I do believe that I can make this PowerPoint available for you if you're not taking notes. I called it the 12 items. Honestly, you're going to get a lot more than 12 items to think about, but these are the critical components that I see getting missed or causing people a lot of headache and problem associated with projects. We all think about the construction and the building in and of itself, but actually all of the problems develop outside of the building. First step, whatever you're looking for, you need to have it zoned correctly. If you're in the animal care world, you can't put your building wherever you want. So you got to find out what your zoning options are. Now, the more rural your environment, usually the fewer zoning restrictions that exist. And the zoning process is sometimes completely unrestricted. You can put whatever you want in there. Most of the time, there's zoning in place and you're not allowed to put animal care structures, specifically animal holding. You guys will love to get thrown into the commercial kennel world, as deceptive as that may be on the style and delivery that you're going to be providing the community, but you end up getting looped into that. Maybe some of you have already dealt with this, but zoning is the number one hurdle, and that's probably the very first question that you need to get answered. Can I do this? And here's the additional points that are not listed in my 12, but you're going to want to take note of. There's typically 3 categories that any property is going to fall into for you. The first one's going to be use by right or permitted use. What that means is the zoning designation allows the type of business that you want to put in there just out of the gate. So it's permitted use. Where most of you are probably going to deal with something called a conditional use, or you hear about CUPs, conditional use permits. What those are is they might let you do it, but they want to go through a qualification process. They want to know details like hours of operation. They want to know what your fecal management plan is. They want to know all kinds of little aspects, how long are the dogs going to be outside, that kind of stuff. And they're going to put you through a little bit of a process, potentially even public hearing, and then they're going to give you a permission to do it or not. And then the third category is not permitted. That just means you should not waste your time there and go look for a different property. That's on the zoning side. The other hurdles that I've got listed here are things like access to it. The road that you're on, whether it's Department of Transportation, a county road, a city road, depending on that, that's going to affect your access. Access can be a major issue. For the most part, you need to be granted access to your property, but you could have turn lanes, you could have traffic signals, you could have all kinds of things. The more rural you are, usually the less impact there is. More municipal, the more densely populated area, the more conditions that come into play. But DOT is a piece of the puzzle, and they are a completely different permitting entity than your municipality, and they don't care about each other. The municipality may say, well, you need DOT approval. DOT is very high on the hierarchy in life. They rank right up there with we'll say the FBI. That's how high they rank on the importance scale in dealing with them. And they don't care who you are. They just do what they want to do. So you got to deal with them. Utilities, probably your next biggest hurdle is you got to make sure that whatever you're going to do from a sourcing of your property standpoint for your utilities is that you have a solution. Whether that's municipal water, the sewer, could be septic. That's not necessarily a problem, but you need to have that answer early on with regards to that property. You need to make sure that you've got power available. Some of you may know that there's multiple kinds of power. There's single phase and 3-phase. A lot of times with our commercial style of buildings and the ventilation systems, we prefer to have 3-phase power available. That does not mean single phase won't work. It's just a preference, gives you a few more options from a power standpoint, but it's something that you should know, and any engineer that's going to be involved is going to need to know that. Then you're talking about, the last one is gas. Gas is not a critical component to be able to open up your business on this property, but it is a component that can help with dehumidification. So it is handy to be able to have that for your mechanical system. Not critical, it just changes how you plan for it. Next is going to be topography. So that's the obvious one. You stand there, you look at a piece of land out there, and if it's got a lot of change in elevation, that it's a piece you're going to have to deal with. Wetlands, so low areas. And remember, wetlands doesn't mean that the ground is wet. That's actually a designation by soil composition. So you may be buying a piece of property that has wetlands on it, but you don't even know that because it doesn't look like it. So that is some research that's worthy of doing, as if it's a designated wetland anywhere. Rock outcroppings, that's another piece that you're going to want to look for. You see some rock outcroppings that could be problematic from a building standpoint, not stopping you. It's just a cost component that you got to factor in. Obviously, in an ideal scenario, you've got virgin ground that's, got good fill on it and naturally sloping one direction. That's going to be your least expensive, with all kinds of power, water, and sewer right there. That's the perfect spot. Most of us don't have access to that, but that's ideal if you can find it. Phase 1 environmental study. That's going to be normally required by the bank. Prior to what they're doing is they're verifying that it wasn't ever identified as a dumping ground of some sort, that there's no registered oil spills of some sort, that kind of stuff. So, at least from a paperwork standpoint, it doesn't look like there's any, EPA type hurdles associated with that property. And then the timeline associated with a new build. You would be in this market. You'd be lucky to pull something off in 12 months. That doesn't mean that you can't, that's not impossible, but it really comes down to how intense of a building are you building, permitting process with that municipality. If it's county or unrestricted, then you're probably going to be the fastest way through. But we've seen them take as long as 3 years to get through the process. And that's not necessarily building. That's just talking about, from the idea to open the doors. All right. Next, renovation expansion. Again, I'm assuming that you're not in your existing. If you are in your existing facility, you may or may not know what you're zoned. But if your zoning was a conditional use, then likely you're not allowed to expand that without going through an additional review process. But zoning is going to be your first check on that. If you're buying another building, you want to make sure that it's zoned correctly or that you can go through the conditional use process associated with it. Things that you want to look for when you buy a property or an existing building, it was typically under a specific use. And whatever you're changing to from a animal care standpoint, they might put you in the category of commercial kennel, whatever the designation is that you fall under. Some jurisdictions don't even have it. So, you got to kind of look to see what you're up against, but it can change your parking counts. They can require sprinkler systems. There's all kinds of things that come with that. I hope I'm not scaring you guys with this kind of stuff. It's just, these are the questions that you want to ask and find out so that you can be educated on what you're looking at doing. Utilities, same thing. A lot of times the power coming into the building is inadequate. Mechanical system would be inadequate. I would highly recommend, if you're buying an existing property, that you have the underground plumbing scoped. And it's not like everybody can do that, but what you find out is if there's any cracks in the existing system, or if it's ancient, it can be leaching into the ground, and you don't want to find that out after you've already got in there. So it'd be great to be able to have it scoped, and they can map it while they're doing that too, which obviously helps from a design standpoint, planning for sewer. Same with power and gas. You want to check on what you got and then make sure that it's going to be enough for what you're looking to do. I'd also recommend the structural investigation. Sometimes a structural engineer can do it. A lot of times we can just look when we're there, and you're looking for any indicators that there's weak spots. That's not necessarily a problem. You just want to know going in that there's either going to be repair work associated with that or not. So just pay attention to the details. If you see block walls and you see cracks, you know that there's some settling. You just need to make sure that that's easily fixed if it's actually a problem. Again, you might have a phase 1 environmental. Normally, the renovation project is a little bit faster. Not that the construction is necessarily faster, but the speed at which it is, because you already have a building and the property is developed. What slows down the new build is the fact that you have to develop the property. The existing one normally can get you through a little faster. Looks like it grows up here. There we go. Lease space. All right. The lease space is probably the fastest way to get a new space open. This is not your only option, but the reason I bring it up is sometimes you can't buy property and you're going to have to lease, and that's just going to be the way to do business in your area. Here are the things that you need to check for. Again, oh, look at that. Zoning is number 1. I can't stress it enough. And I would go a little further and say, I would look for the answer in black and white. This property is zoned correctly from the municipality. I have a lot of times a realtor will tell you, yep, it should be good. And guess what? The person selling the building will say, yeah, that'll be no problem. But I've watched it be a problem time and time again. So just make sure that you get that answer 100%, not pretty much. Words like pretty much, not going to cut it. Study the rent. If you haven't ever leased before, you need to pay attention to the details of the rent. So you've got your lease rate, and you hear about triple net. What is factored in and above the lease rate generally is something called CAM, common area maintenance. So you can look at additional costs associated with that. Just be smart about figuring out all of the costs associated with it. It's not just the lease rate. And I would recommend that you have somebody review the lease. If you're not familiar with it, have somebody in the industry review that to make sure that you're getting everything that you should out of it and you're not getting put in a bad spot. Take a look at, study your client route into your space and what's available for outdoor space, if any. When you're talking to your landlord, whoever that is, most clients try and negotiate build out credits. You may or may not have availability to do that, but it's a great piece if you can get it. A lot of times they'll do it on dollars per square foot. Sometimes they'll do a set amount. That's going to be for you to work on with the landlord. One of the problems that I have run into many times with our clients and lease spaces is not understanding where responsibilities start and stop. For example, if you're going to put new mechanical equipment on the roof, is that your mechanical equipment or is that the landlord's mechanical equipment? The landlord is normally responsible for the structure. But if you're going to put a new mechanical unit up there and you're going to cut the roof, now who's responsible for that curb cut and the flashing associated with it and making sure that if a roof leak happens, that who's responsible? It's just an example, but you really want to get into some of the details on where responsibilities start and stop with regards to your lease space. You're also likely going to have to plan for additional sound attenuation. And what that means is if you have tenants on either side of you that are different uses, you may need to create firewalls on either side of you. And the fire rating can be increased, and there's a very specific type of construction. So you may have that, or you may get forced into a higher level of STC rating, which is the sound transfer class of a wall, which is a very specific build type. You're also going to look at that interior space as well. So it's not just sound transfer from your space outward, but even within one space to another. Take a look at the different ways to be able to build walls with a higher STC rating. And again, the timeline, I say 9 to 18 months. This is all size driven and process driven based on zoning. But it's generally the fastest way to get there. I haven't lost anybody yet, have I? All right. As you can see, we have a nice kitty cat that's a good engineer on our screen here. Do I need an architect? Do I need engineering? Obviously, for us, we are architects and engineers, so we think they're necessary. But the reality of it is not every project is going to have that. You need to determine what type of project you've got. Certain areas are going to require you to have fully comprehensive design. Others are going to be able to get away with a napkin sketch. And sometimes it's somewhere in between. So you do want to be aware of that you may need an architect involved. They are typically going to draw a full set of plans architecturally. They're also going to coordinate with the mechanical engineer and electrical engineer. I don't know why my screen isn't moving. There we go. So I talked about the first two, programming. That's another thing the architect is going to be a part of to get all of your details into the design. Got my important note here that size does matter in building, and that is really translates to dollars. The more space you got, the more dollars you're going to spend. It's very simple math, and in today's market, there are ways to make your dollars per square foot more or less, but generally speaking, the bigger your space, the more you're going to spend on it. I recommend that you stay in preliminary design. So you do your programming, you come up with your first floor plan. I recommend you stay in that preliminary design phase until you really feel good about the layout, what you've got. I also recommend getting cost estimates as early as possible. So you get a preliminary plan done, get a cost estimate so you have a ballpark of what this thing is going to go for. As you probably know, you're going to get a lot higher number than not only you want it to be, than you're expecting it to be, as the way it's going to go every time. So get it early, because when you start in the preliminary plan and you've got an estimate that's early on, that is your most opportune time to make changes in your whole game plan. So if you've got a big budget bust of $1 million or $500,000, you can make changes at that very early stage. So that's why I recommend it. Site work, single biggest variable. You would likely need a civil engineer to do the site development details, which is going to be your stormwater management calculations, parking lot. They may even deal with your parking lot lighting, but then they're going to grade the whole lot, determine what the curb is and the size of the parking stalls, all that kind of stuff. And then, like I suggested before, I recommend that you do spend money on investigation. And this is all depending on the investment of the parcel or the building. Look ahead and try and get as many answers you can so they don't bust your budget when you get going. Our goal in every project is that you don't go past what your contingency was available for you to do. And it's very easy in construction to have that happen once everything's in motion. The better work you can do on the front end, the better chance that you'll have. All right, construction. Building a budget. I'm going to hit on this because this seems to be where there's a lot of industry confusion. And I know some of you are going to ask, I just want to find out what the dollars per square foot are. I'm not going to be able to answer that question. I'm going to give you some details on that here in a little bit as to why, but here's what you should be planning when you're looking at your project. First off, you've got your site acquisition, whatever that is. If you already own the property, that's awesome. You can take that off the equation, but most of us, you're going to have to purchase something there. Lease space, you don't have that, but you'd have your rent, so you'd have to plan for it. Site development infrastructure. We isolate that particular line item because if we take your design building, and let's say it's a 5,000 square foot building, I should be able to isolate that cost for that building and plop it down on any lot, and the variable that will change will be the lot. Some sites are going to cost you significantly more to develop than others, so we isolate that because of the infrastructure needed for it, topography, all those different things that we covered earlier. Then I like to look at a building only cost. So just to do this building, so that'd be your slab, that's your walls, that's interior walls, your lighting, your mechanical, plumbing, roofing, all that stuff is going to go into the building only. Then you need to look at your design and engineering costs. And a good rule of thumb that I think the industry uses is plan on 10% of your building design or building costs to be what the design and engineering costs are. Most of the time it's less than that, but it's a good budgeting number for you to have when you're planning that. Now, if you're not going to go through design or you've got alternative solutions, obviously those dollars could be significantly different. Equipment. One of the other deceptions is you think that because you're putting a space in that is the overall cost of what you're doing, but you really need a bunch of equipment in there, and there can be anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 in equipment. It's a big factor, and you need to be planning ahead for it. Soft costs and financing. This is going to be whatever the fees are associated with it. It is not intended like they're all equal. I know the SBA side is a little bit more expensive, but it also has the least amount of equity that you need to put in. So that's the trade-off there, but you need to plan for those financing costs. And the last one is I recommend you have at least a 10% contingency. That can be your contingency. That's not anybody else's. And you want to try and control that, but you need to have some protection for unforeseen conditions. Without it, your project can get put in a very compromised position, because no matter how good we are or anybody else is, nobody can predict exactly how it's going to go. So have something in there to protect you on it. So for animal care, here's what I'm going to tell you guys, because we could spend all day on this, and literally this is an 8-hour or probably 2-day presentation that I'm cramming into an hour. Our rule of thumb is try to minimize your edges. As you know, any collection spot, try and eliminate it. In this picture, you see a lot of good stuff where we've got our floor transitioning to our wall, a lot of good stuff there. But what you see over here by the edge of the door is a natural hair collection spot. So not ideal, but this is stuff that you want to make good decisions on. In general, try to limit the amount of edges that can collect debris and make cleaning more difficult, right? So that's going to be your initial game plan. Use that as a filter for everything that you're doing in the design. I recommend using as durable products as you can get. Durability and aesthetics do not necessarily go hand in hand. Sometimes they do. Those are normally the most expensive products when you can get something very durable and very attractive. So there's a lot of products out there. You just need to make sure that you're getting educated on that. This is your finishes, your final touches. This is what's going to maintain your facility long beyond the initial entry. When you get into the space in an ideal world, 5 years later, when we come back to look at it, it looks really, really close to the way it did when you opened. That's a well-running facility. And to be able to do that, you need to have good cleaning protocols in place as well. But having the facility set up right to be able to clean successfully, big part of that. Think about the outdoor space. We're talking about turf, fencing. There's some pretty big dollars associated with that aspect. You don't want to forget about that part, and it is generally not part of your building cost. Now, if you're putting turf inside, obviously that would be interior of the building cost. But the outside space, you need to factor those in because the turf's not cheap, fencing's not cheap, and likely you're going to want some special type of fencing. Lots of stuff from that standpoint that needs to be factored in, budgeting standpoint. But what I found is the natural products that you put outside, if you were to go with, a mulch or P-rock or some of those more natural products, very economical, but they track into your building, they create mud. So, there's some things like that that a person has to consider. I'm not trying to sway you one direction or another as much as educating you on what's all out there. Flooring, obviously a big topic in the industry. We like an epoxy type flooring for the durability of it, the cleanability of it. It's not the only product out there. Some people like tile, which is also a very durable product. I recommend a specific acrylic grout if you're going to do tile. We've got some fluid applied soft rubber floors that work out pretty well. And there's even applications for an LVT, which is a very inexpensive portion. Maybe that's a lobby type scenario. But anyway, flooring is a big deal. Going to be a pretty good chunk of your budget. You need to factor that in. I touched on this earlier, sound control, STC, and reverberation. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because there are actually acousticians out there that focus on this, but STC is the transfer of sound from one space to another. If I build the perfect wall to be able to limit sound, and let's call it an STC 50, as soon as I put an outlet in there or a door, that wall no longer performs at that exact level anymore. It's compromised. That's not necessarily a problem as much as you're aware that there is a weak spot to be able to get through. That's your bottom of your door is where sound is going to come through. A window in the door, same type of thing. So that's a factor. The reverberation is the sound within the space. So the dog barks at 90 decibels, bounces off the wall and reverberates in. In most animal care facilities, we have a difficult time creating a cleanable environment that's also absorption, that has the sound absorption capability. That's why you see a lot of suspended ceilings in facilities like this, because you don't really have a lot of other ways. You can put sound baffles up around the perimeter of the wall to try and help absorb. The other thing I'll tell you is varying planes. So ceilings, walls, that kind of thing, helps deaden sound to energy. Sound is just an energy that bounces around. So I'm not solving the problem for you guys on this call. I'm just making you aware that you need to try and factor these in to the best of your ability. Vacuum system. This would be like a wet dry system if you're going to use that instead of drains. It's something to consider and think about. It also helps with your overall cleaning and your humidity, which is a factor in most of these facilities. And then wall protection. You're probably going to spend a fair amount of money on wall protection. There's a couple of different kinds out there. We primarily use a product called FRP, fiberglass reinforced plastic. And then there's Acrovin, which is more of a aesthetic brand, same type of stuff. It's got a lot more color options with it, a little more expensive. So anyway, those are some products that you're probably going to use a lot of. Plan on budgets for those. Now, this is really where the dog gurus help you the most. I just have a couple of points in here. Planning for being operational. Once the doors are open, you don't want to wait till the doors are open to figure this out. Have your pricing established ahead of time. It should be all part of your cash flow. All of those details should be thought out long before you open your doors. Not that you can't adjust afterwards, but have a solid plan in place and make sure somebody who's been there in front of you, understands that and sees that it works. Staff is probably going to be the thing that will eat up your profits the fastest. And so you need to take a look at making your staff as efficient as possible, make their life as easy as you can. And hopefully you can, minimize the amount of staff needed to be able to manage the volume of clients that you're going to have in there. Likely need to make a fecal management plan. You guys have probably seen grinder sinks. A lot of you probably use trash cans, that type of stuff. You're going to have to, in many municipalities, they actually require you to have a plan that you're going into. So just be cognizant of that. That doesn't mean that what you're doing now isn't right. It's just a lot of times municipalities want to know that you have a plan. I also suggest that you go see other places that are in operation. So you're going to learn not only maybe some good practices that somebody else is doing, but you might learn what you don't want to do. And that can be just as valuable that you don't fall into that trap. And then the obvious one of keeping the animals safe and enriched, that's making them want to come back. All right, I did pretty well keeping this efficient. Here are the 12 points that I'm going to call out on here out of the many, many points I already made. Number one, figure out what you need and want in your new building. That's going to be the most helpful to get a good start on that. Add the team members as the need arises. You will not start needing the entire group that I mentioned earlier, but you're going to need to add them as you go. Zoning. Can't stress it enough. Make sure that you've got the zoning thing figured out. Utilities can be hugely problematic if you don't have a good handle on where that's at, whether it's, like I said, the water coming in, the power, sewer. You need to make sure that you're covered there. Appropriate timeline. Another mistake that people make is they think they can get it done a heck of a lot faster than it can actually happen. So, and no matter what I tell you, you're probably still better off planning a little bit of time because you don't know what all the variables are going to be. And even if it's executed flawlessly, it's still probably going to take a touch longer. Suggest spending the money on the appropriate investigation so you're not burned when you're in the throes of it and you have no choice. That is not a good time to find out that there's a major discrepancy in the power that's available or the water that's available or your sewer connection or whatever. Build an accurate budget. Another mistake that I see made constantly is just not understanding all of the pieces of the puzzle. When we look at a project, we look at the entire project expense, not necessarily what does it cost to build it. The building is one portion of the mix, but you need to be aware of all the expenses so that you build the appropriate building with all of those expenses associated. I think you're going to want to spend the money on the mechanical system. It's another big piece of the puzzle. When the place smells nice, everyone likes that environment. One of the missing pieces that a lot of people have is on the dehumidification side. I didn't spend a lot of time on that, but when you're air conditioning, you're naturally dehumidifying, but spaces that have animals in them, you can reduce the odor as well as increase the comfort if you're dehumidifying. So that's going to be part of your system. Don't be afraid to spend the money on that. Have an operational plan before you open and go visit another operational facility. All right. Might be a record, but that's good because I left a gap for some questions.
Thank you so much, Eric. This was wonderful. And we do have some questions. So let me start. Tracy's asking, do you have a recommended list of finishing products, such as what you recommended for specific flooring types, fencing style, type, sound panels, etc.? And if not, where could I find such a beneficial list?
It's great. There are, those of us in the industry, deal with those types of products all the time. So the simple list that I can give you on this, and I could follow up actually with a more comprehensive email that maybe you could send out to the whole group. I'm sure everyone would like that. I'm trying to not stay brand specific because it's not like there's any one brand that's necessarily better than another. I recommend that you always touch and feel what you're going to buy before you buy it. But like I said, an epoxy floor, a high built epoxy floor with the right texture on it is a great solution from a flooring standpoint. There's a couple different rubber floors from a exercise room standpoint. There's a recycled product and then there's a fluid applied product. It all depends on the look. The one picture I showed you guys earlier, that was a fluid applied one where we made it look like a field house type environment. Wall protection, I think I said FRP, which is made by a number of different companies. It's just a generic term for it, like Kleenex. And then there's Acrovin, which is its own specific brand. And there are a number of other, you would just do, like if you went into Google, you would look up like wall protection, and it's used in the medical field all over the place. The details on that really come down to the install. And if you see FRP, like in it's got a pebbly finish on it, they'll use transition strips. I'm not a big fan of those transition strips, and there's a top cap for it. I like to have them be butt jointed together with the caulk bead in between as small as I can possibly get it, so that there's the least amount of possibility of it getting ripped off the wall. And that's, like I said, a little bit of the manufacturer doesn't recommend that you do it that way, but we think it's a better finish and lower likelihood. You even see it in this lower corner right here. That's a transition strip. I prefer to not have those if we can do it. Other materials, there's all kinds of sound baffle materials out there that you could get. There's nothing, I don't have a recommended solution on it, but sound baffles or wall panels. The coolest ones that I've seen are the ones where you've got like a picture of your animal and they put it on there and you can put that up on the wall or make a mosaic pattern. So those are really cool because then you can get some artwork and color built into your space while getting a functional value out of them. And like I said, you can web research that. That's a lot of your interior materials that I talked about. But I could maybe get a more comprehensive list after this.
That'd be awesome.
Great. Also, Evelyn asked, what are the build out credits?
Build out credit on a lease space. So when you go to lease a space, there's a cost to build it out, and you're the tenant, so you're going to bear that cost. But landlords, as incentive to lease out that space, sometimes will offer what's called a build out credit. Like, let's say there's a chiropractor in a space now and they moved out. So your space, you actually have to spend money to demo before you can go forward. Sometimes the landlord will do that demo, give you a vanilla shell. This is just industry terminology, but there's a warm vanilla shell, a cold vanilla shell, types of conditions that you receive the space in. Sometimes they will incentivize you to take over their space and give you, okay, we're going to lease this to you at $20 a square foot, but we'll give you a $10 a square foot build out credit. And that's really to help you get a bathroom in, and we'll say some miscellaneous ceiling tile. It sort of helps you get somewhere with your build out. So that's the idea behind a build out credit. Not everyone gets it, and sometimes it doesn't apply to your situation, but it's worth asking.
Absolutely. Jeremy asked, actually said they use rubber flooring and have had nothing but issues. Currently, they're exploring using Ultra Symphonia instead. Do you have any insight into how well that product works?
I don't. We've used a lot of different products. I don't recognize that one. From a branding standpoint, I can tell you that there could be 50 people on this call, and one person's going to say they absolutely hate one of the products they have. The next person's going to say they absolutely love it. The best you can do, and this is why part of the site visit that I recommend you go do, is you're going to want to see if you like the way that flooring is performing, the way it looks. I know in the rolled rubber floor we've put down, you got to seal it. You're going to have to reseal it over time. Like, there's some challenges with it. The fluid applied one is a little bit more expensive, a little nicer finish on it. You don't have to do as much maintenance with it. But I'm unfortunately, I can't give you any better answer on that particular product, other than I really encourage you to go look, because what you're finding, I would hope you could find it before you put it in, so that you can make the best possible decision.
I actually use that rolled rubber flooring in my facility, and we installed it 17 years ago, and then just once a year did the resealing on the top, and it lasted so well. So, but we were cautious about the maintenance on it and making sure we redid that ceiling. Let's see, who else here? Patrice asks, can you speak to different types of turf?
I can, but I'm only going to guide you on what I would use as my filter for determining what product I would use. There are multiple products out there that are geared for canine use. My recommendation is you want to look at what the permeability of the product is. So when you flip a chunk of turf over, you're going to see if it's a woven back, how many holes that they've got punched in it. So you get your drainage side. You're going to want to evaluate that. You're going to want to evaluate the pile, the thickness of it. And if it lays down or stands back up, and then there's, how that installation is going to happen. I was just talking to one of our clients earlier today, and she was taking a look at a different product, and, went to look at a couple of examples before she said, yeah, that's the one I want. They do range in cost anywhere from $10 a square foot to $25 a square foot in expense. And that is relative to the amount of square footage and your existing conditions. So, they're going to assume when you put turf down, you're going to peel back probably 3 or 4 inches of topsoil. Then they're going to put a granular base down, and then they're going to want to try and slope it. The installation is probably the single biggest piece of this that you're going to want to make sure is done right. Don't let some knucklehead do it. I will not be installing your turf. You want the guy who's good at it, because the seaming is everything for that. So, but there's a lot of turf product. I would look first at the products that are specifically geared for animal care, only because there's probably 3 or 4 of them out there. Again, web research will get you there fairly quickly. And the reason I say that is they're the ones that have done a little more testing, like canine grass, as an example. Obviously, it's in the name of what they've gone for on it. Good product, woven back on it. You can dump a 5-gallon pail through it, it'll go through. So, if you're interested in that, there's a couple of other manufacturers out there on it. But I would look into that and see if you can see an install somewhere so you can make a determination on it.
Great. Kimberly asked, she's thinking about core versus flex on master plan. How would you prioritize flooring materials? For example, could I start with concrete and add epoxy later?
Yes, you could look at doing that. Here are the trade-offs associated with it. Number one, concrete is a porous product. So if you're going to start with straight concrete, you're going to do something a little bit different on the pour. And I'm going to assume it's a fresh pour as opposed to an existing one. All right. So on a fresh pour, you're probably going to more burn that concrete on there. So it's going to get harder. And the reason that you do that comparatively to the epoxy, you want to bond to it. But if you're going with sealed concrete, I want to make it as tight as I can. So you're going to trowel it a lot, or as they say, burn the concrete. Then you're going to put a sealer and a densifier type thing on it. If you were to do that, and the sealer is going to last, 1 to 2 years, depending on how you're cleaning it, the intensity, the foot traffic, a bunch of variables in it, you're going to need to seal quite a bit more frequently. The biggest downfall with starting with a plan and then upgrading or making the change is the downtime associated with it. So when you make that transition on a floor, you don't have the ability to use that space. And you're probably going to give up 4 or 5 days of time, depending on its size and what you're going to do. So specifically, if I were to go from a concrete floor to a fluid applied, like epoxy type floor. So that's why I say that doesn't mean that it's not a good solution. You just need to be educated on what the trade-off is if you're going to make a change. or you're going to pay more to do it in two halves, right? You're going to do it in half this way or half that way. So
Jim is asking, whoops, except for the comment just popped away. How many clients do you see that are asking about fear-free designs?
Fearfree came up, a number of years ago. It really hasn't been as prevalent as it was, but I think most of us are kind of naturally integrating it in. So it's less of a, oh, this facility is dramatically different as fear-free, because a fair amount of fear-free is actually about client education and making sure that they're handling their animals correctly as much as it is the colors in your facility and choosing the right surfaces. I think we're naturally cognizant of the animals. What I like about fear-free is a number of things. Number one is that it pushes you to educate your owner. And to me, I really like the idea of starting where the source of the problem is. If the owner's not very good, then for some reason, the pets don't quite do as well. So I like that idea. I also like the idea of making the environment as comfortable as we can for the animal to be in. So that MO, I think, makes total sense. And it doesn't have to necessarily cost more money, like LEED certification, as an example. You have to spend a bunch more money to get LEED certification. You don't necessarily have to spend a bunch more money to be fear-free. So I like it as a direction. I think it's worthy of, if you're designing with somebody, I think it's worthy of bringing up and making sure that you're integrating as much practically as you can.
Okay. In terms of kennel or run sizes, are you seeing a greater demand for larger spaces like suites? Or how about the runs with outdoor space?
Well, I'll answer it reverse order. Runs with outdoor space is going to be relative to your environment. Some places are just not going to let you do that, so you don't really have a choice. So I have a couple of different conflicting directions here, and that's not necessarily, it's relative to your situation. So if you're a big daycare, you're not spending as much time in that space. And so if you're talking strictly boarding, I like to have a little nicer space, larger size, but I also think that, some of the animals feel a little lost in a space that's too large as well. So there is a level of security and comfort in a smaller space. Now, you don't need to, like, my big fat dog crawls into this little tiny space and loves it. I don't think that that's the MO here. I like to give them a comfortable environment. I think that that's the best move. But I do also recognize that we are marketing to people who pay for this stuff. I look at it as a 5x5 space, as an example, is 25 square feet. A 4x6 space is 24 square feet. Square footage is real estate that is rented. So from a business model standpoint, I want to try and be as effective as I can with that space. I like to see a little bit more rectangular than square. And what most of our clients are doing is they're gearing them more towards a 3x4, 3x5, 4x4, 4x5 size. And then they're offering a smaller number of larger ones and a smaller number of, we'll say, executive style or presidential style suites. And in all honesty, those are really for the people. They are the animal. So hopefully that answers your question.
As far as washrooms, do you recommend that you put FRP from floor to ceiling?
Yes. But that's the short answer is listen, if drywall and paint is easy to repair, but as well as I do that every dog that goes into a space that gets wet is going to shake. It's going all over the place. I would recommend vinyl covered ceiling tile, and I would put FRP or some type of wall covering everywhere in there. It's not as aesthetic, as attractive from that standpoint, but you are really focused on function at that point. Unless you're talking about a grooming area specifically that's on display, then I might alter a little bit, but I still want as much wall protection as I can get. I love the idea of durability because I don't want you to have to go in and deal with it regularly. Like, it shouldn't be in your agenda is go fix stuff every day.
Okay. For exterior fencing, do you recommend a standard chain link or other styles? Also, what height do you recommend?
These are great questions. I love them. So here's my advice. I don't like chain link from a ear poking through bit on the other side. It depends if you're splitting up yards. So I'm not a big fan of it. It is probably the easiest product to climb. So from that standpoint, I don't really like it. If you're talking about like a black vinyl chain link, it's slightly more attractive than the galvanized look. So there's a little bit more attractiveness to that. Black's a little easier to see through. But in general, I don't like chain link. But it is very economical. So from that standpoint, I get it. Like you're going to have your business owner, you got to figure out where your dollars and cents are. I'm just not the biggest fan of chain link for the reasons I just gave. Conversely, some of the other products, and I'll get to the height question in a second. I do like my favorite aesthetic look. I do like the aluminum, more of a picket style, not necessarily with, puncture capability at the top of it, but the ability to have this puppy area down below. But when you're separating play yards, you need to make sure that you've got the ability that an ear's not going to get through and a bite can't happen from the other side. So think about the spacing and get that minimized as best you can. So we see a lot of combination fences. So we do like a solid privacy style, maybe between the yards, and then on the end, maybe looking out or something like that, depending on if you want that visibility, and you can switch to a little different style and close it in that way. Here's my personal preference on height. I like 8 foot is my favorite height because I've never seen a dog jump an 8-foot fence. Not that that couldn't happen, but the likelihood is very low. You may not be able to do 8 foot. 8 foot is a slightly unusual fence. So here's the trade-offs is on an 8-foot fence, you may have to deal with wind load if it's a solid fence. So you might have to look at a more robust material to deal with that. You may have ordinance that doesn't allow you to go up to 8 foot. So that's another component of it. So that's kind of struggle points. 6 foot is a lot more common. It's easily gotten, manufactured at, high volumes and is generally accepted everywhere. So we see a lot more 6-foot fences. Ideally, I would have the top bent back in a little bit. It all depends if you're on leash, off leash, how you're set up, but I'm going to guess most of you are trying to go off leash and it's a kind of a fun environment there. You can put the coyote bars in the top to, limit the ability to climb. There's a number of different fences out there that have that, kind of reduce the climbing ability on it, but that's my advice on it. I'm more of the point of, if anything bad happens one time, you may never live it down. So I just kind of err on the side of don't even let it be a possibility.
Personal recommendation on height: if you live in a cold climate, an 8-foot fence is the best, if not higher, because when you get snow on the ground, 8 feet can easily become 6 feet, or 6 feet can become 4 feet, depending on the snowpack. So something to consider if you're in a colder climate.
For sure.
We are at the end. I can't believe that hour flew by, and I'm just so grateful for Eric being here and presenting to us. This has been recorded, and the recording will be available. We will send out an email to all but those who were registered. So if some people were not able to get in for the presentation live, we will definitely have that recording available to you. So thank you again for joining us, Eric. What a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Thanks, too.